And in fact, for more on this, Greg Swenson, who is a US political analyst, is now joining us live from London. Greg, I want to pick your brains over this because you are looking at it from a zoomed out lens. You are joining us from London and you are watching the US next presidency unfold, the process unfold. While there is argument that a number of voters in this election cycle have voted pro-economy, hence Donald Trump. How do you concur that with the argument that perhaps a Trump presidency would see a rise in issues like inflation, etc.? How do you really view what's exactly happening over here in America as regards the economy, and when you look at it from a zoomed out lens?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. I'm finding that the hostile media in the U.S. would look at any potential angle to criticize President Trump or try to scare voters into thinking that there would be inflation in his next term or there'd be some other problem in the next term, when in fact, there's really no valid proof of that. They can always find, some economics professor at a university that doesn't like Trump to say that, his policies would be bad. But the reason that just doesn't make any sense is because he was already president for one term. And if you just look at his record, and you compare it, especially when you compare it to the Biden-Harris administration, it's so obvious that his policies had so much better outcomes for Americans and for the world, for that matter. So, his tax reform and deregulation, which was his core economic policy, resulted in significant wage growth, 6.8% in 1 year, 8% over his 4 years as president, and that compared to only 4% in 8 years under Obama Biden. So, 0.5% a year. And then he had 2% per year on average. And then, of course, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris presided over so-called Bidenomics. And the wage growth was negative. There was a decrease in wages of 3.5% in real terms. So, obviously the economic policies and outcomes of these two administrations are starkly different. And so that's what I would point to. And, will he slightly change his economic policy? Perhaps. He's talking about tariffs. I think you can argue those could be inflationary. But the reality is the tax cuts and deregulation, really liberated the supply side. So we had lower energy costs, and those lower energy costs translate into lower food costs and lower costs on chemicals and all kinds of downstream items. And so, I don't think there's any conflict with the fact that he won on the economy. It's almost always the number one issue for American voters. And there's no conflict between his victory on that issue. He's always been leading in the polls on that issue. So it doesn't really contradict anything in his policies. And look, if he changes his policies for some reason, I don't know why he would, but you might see different outcomes. But no, there's no conflict there.
Speaking of conflicts, Greg, how can we not talk about the commitments that Trump has made vis-a-vis ending the war in Ukraine, specifically being able to broker a deal in 24 hours? How realistic is that? How optimistic are you that Trump will be able to make a significant impact as far as the Ukraine war is concerned, as far as the situation in West Asia is concerned?
Yeah, I mean, look, I never like to put timelines on these things, and I think President Trump either was exaggerating or using hyperbole, which is one of his habits, but I think the message is clear, and I don't doubt what he's going to do and what he means to do. The only way he could do it in 24 hours is if he starts now. And if you recall, from your history books, in 1980, Reagan took office after winning in November of 1980. He didn't take office until January of 81, and the hostages in Iran were released that day. So obviously Reagan wasn't negotiating, in 24 hours. He was either negotiating while he was the incumbent, he was the president to be in those 3 months between November of 80 and Jan 81. So yeah, I think President Trump might have an opportunity to do that negotiating now, and then have the war ended by by his inauguration. I mean, that's just one scenario that could be possible. But the details on when and how quickly it happens aren't as relevant as just the fact that this war will end a lot sooner with President Trump at the helm than it will with Biden or the continuation of the Biden policies or administration, which would be Kamala Harris. So I think it's, it's pretty clear that their views are completely different. Trump wants to end this war. There might have to be some concessions, which some people aren't going to like. The problem is the alternative is to continue the killing indefinitely. It's not like it's another few months here and there. It doesn't look like this war is ending anytime soon.
Greg, there's a lot of talk around Elon Musk. One perhaps is expecting to see him amid the ranks. We've seen how he has been with Twitter, his policy towards Twitter, which is a social media platform, a public platform, where on the one hand, he spoke of free speech, and on the other, he started curtailing a lot of rights of people tweeting on the platform. What is that reflective of? He is part of Trump's team. Where do you see people like Elon Musk, who was one of his biggest campaigners, making an impact?
Well, I think, Elon Musk obviously is a champion of free speech. So if he's kept anybody from using the platform, it's only because they were grossly violating some sort of rules, because it's the complete opposite of what it was before he bought it, when they actively censored views that they didn't like. Like anytime if you made any sort of arguments or had discussions about the efficacy of vaccines, or the COVID vaccines, or if you talked about the Great Barrington Declaration, or if you talked about the Hunter Biden laptop or the New York Post, and you were actually censored. And so he's liberated that platform, and he is a free speech absolutist, which I think is refreshing. And I think he'd be a great asset for the Trump administration in the sense that the bloated bureaucracy in Washington has to be managed. It's really become so bloated that it's completely out of control in terms of costs and in terms of the overreach into the activities of Americans every day. And so I think it's something that a lot of conservative governments, a lot of Republican presidents have talked about that for generations, but never really do anything about it. So I think, the combination of Trump and Elon Musk could be really refreshing and try to clean up the problems in Washington.